Okay, I hope you enjoyed those presentations. I find them fascinating, yesterday and today as well. Just to add here, we added 2 people to our panel. I mean, we have 3 speakers who appreciate their presentations. We also have Jason Howard-Grau, who's from PAS, and we have Patrick McBride, who is from Clarity. The reason they're on the panels is because we ask our suppliers or sponsors or whoever if they want to nominate speakers, and when they do, we say, please come up. It's because they are relevant to the questions, you know? So do we have any questions for the panel? Right here, Larry? Better that you ask than I do. I mean, I'm sure there'll be very good questions. Yes, go ahead. Oh, there's one over there. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm closer to Gary, so.
All right, you'll get it second. I'm sorry. Please,
Hi.
go ahead.
Yeah, it's on.
Okay. This is Gary Lipson from Ashland. I had a question for you. When you talk about the convergence of IT and OT, where it meets is often where there's a firewall or some interface between the OT network and the IT network. One of the frustrations that we found, as much as we try and communicate across those boundaries, is having, say, the IT folks and the people supporting and monitoring those firewalls, understanding the nature of the traffic that's behind those systems and what's back there, and often it's foreign to them and they don't know what's allowed, not allowed, what's right, what's not right. Can you talk to sort of how that communication and understanding works? And then I'm going to sort of throw in a second one that's related but not quite, in that how do you handle the priority of things? Because things that happen in a plant that runs 24/7 aren't necessarily treated with the same response time that IT organizations often might be looking at and geared up to work for. So if you could address those 2 points, I'd appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah, feel free.
I'll start. Not understanding is not acceptable. That's part of the training and education for your IT folks to embrace and begin to understand. So I would challenge you to build that type of understanding between the 2 organizations. And I think to answer your second question with regards to, you know, the prioritization, the business impact has to take precedence. And that goes back to that education.
Did you have a comment?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
As far as the firewall traffic, we had a team of both OT and IT represented looking at that traffic together. So they determined the firewall rules together to make sure that both sides understood each other. As far as business priority, our SOC knows the IP addresses, the subnets. They know where the plants are, and they know if you see something happening in a plant, it's immediate priority.
Well, and I think that goes back to what I said about the CMDB and making sure that you have every asset and you know what its criticality is, whether it's the data or whether it's the actual system. So are you bringing a line down, and does the SOC know, oh, this is a level 1 criticality versus a 4? It shouldn't matter if it's an enterprise system or a floor system. That criticality should be treated equally, and it's the same vernacular, it's the same vocabulary. So everyone should have the same understanding of that and be able to respond to that.
Yeah, adding to one of the things that people
Turn it on. I think it is. It's green.
Test.
Green means,
There we go.
Green
Bring
means
it up.
on.
It usually red's bad, right? Sid?
That's right.
One of the things that the advice to do asset inventory is hugely appropriate, and you hear it in every cybersecurity. You don't know if you don't know what you have, you can't protect it. Part of that, to your question, is also knowing the protocols behind that. There tend to be, obviously, a lot of the automation vendors have their own sophisticated protocols, different than what the IT folks use. And there's a lot of tools that companies like ours actually can provide that. So the inventory is not just the individual assets, the PLCs, HMIs, engineering workstations, et cetera, on the network. It's also what kind of traffic are they talking about. And we talked a little bit about some of the threats, the NotPetya things. Some of the traffic there, the reasons those things propagated so fast was things like SMB was moving through was a protocol that happens to be a Microsoft protocol, but was moving across the firewalls. That's one of the reasons it got from the IT into the OT. So having that inventory of not just the assets, but the communication protocols ends up being an important part as well.
Thanks, Patrick. To add to that, I think from a practical perspective, it's also looking at the configurations below. So if you understand where an attacker is likely to hit, maybe strayed a little bit off topic, but if you look again practically at it, it's at the point where the digital meets the physical, and understanding what is actually sitting behind and what the critical components of your configurations are is crucially important. Going back to your original question, I embedded IT and OT together, so there was no separation. They ran the firewalls together. The functional capability has to be cross-trained for the long term. That's the only way it'll work.
Yeah, I can't resist commenting, I'm sorry. If you know me, you understand. But no, yesterday in our session yesterday that they were participating in, we had a very, very good discussion about roles and things like that. And the point that came out that I really found very enlightening was they don't necessarily think of it as IT security people or OT security people, they're just security people. And, so in the context of your question where you said it kind of meets there, and I don't know how you viewed that, but it just triggered that thought. A lot of people still think, okay, we're going to get them to work together, which is certainly good. And I think in many cases yesterday we heard maybe in practical ways that certainly happens. There are people probably who are a little better at this and some are better than that and it works. But the ultimate goal, which I found very interesting, was we don't even want them to think that they're IT, cybersecurity, or OT. They're just security people, which I personally found very, very interesting. There was a question over here. If you all want to comment on that, I mean, feel free. But I think you got it. No.
Go ahead.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So thank you so much for sharing your stories and your successes. Very vivid and compelling and persuasive. So my name's Tim Butler with SANS Institute. So a question to the CISOs is, it's really clear that you have really lean, successful teams and people. So in the time of change, have you learned any sort of characteristics like, my all-stars have the following characteristics? Were you able to change and transform people on your team to sort of adopt your methods, or did you have to play my way or the highway? Could you just share with us some of the people stories that you had in that?
Well, I can start because I'm new, right? So they have to I'm a kind of a kick in the pants anyway. And so they have to learn about me. I think one of the things that I've really taken in with them is from the very beginning, I didn't say it's this security framework. I didn't say it's this one. I said, here are 3 choices. Help me choose. Here are the risks that I see. Help me prioritize those. And again, it goes back to it's not IT or OT, it's just security. And when you frame it that way and you engage them in the process, and I'm fortunate because I am new that I'm building those things, but I think it still applies that that engagement, it becomes a way to, they want to proceed and they want to see that through because they helped build it. So it's not my way or the highway, and it can't be that way.
And you mentioned something yesterday about just the aptitude, what kind of people you hire for that I think is really appropriate.
Yeah, and so the other thing that I mentioned, thank you. So one is that engagement, but the other thing is, we're going through digital transformation, which requires some organizational change. Our intent is to keep all of the people that fit in our future state organization. And I hire for 2 things, aptitude and motivation. And I can send you anywhere. I can pair you up with someone that has so much knowledge about the floor. I can cross-functionally educate you across IT and OT. But if you're not motivated and you're not committed to what that future state is, you become toxic not just to yourself, but to the team around you. And so sometimes there are hard people decisions as well. And that's not a my way or highway. It's, this is our future state, and I need you to be engaged in that process, or you need to find a place where you will be more successful.
The one thing that I look for is passion. Anybody that knows me knows I am very passionate about security. That comes from entering my first security job 1 month before 9/11. Nothing like being thrown into the fire. And so Yeah, and I stayed. But I'm very passionate, and that's all I ask of people is that you care. I inherited a team when I became CISO. That was the first time in my whole career I inherited a team. I never thought about it. I had always built teams from the ground up. And I inherited some people that did not have a passion for securing the company. They would say, we aren't supposed to do that. IT should do that. There was a lot of, and Doug, you were there. There was a lot of this headbutting. And I finally said, look, if you don't come into work every day passionate about protecting this company and protecting our customers, you are not in the right place. So, it's up to you. But I do not want to hear any more complaining. If it needs to be done and IT's not doing it, we're going to do it. I don't really care who's supposed to do it.
Right.
So
Business
that's
goals, right?
I think
Tammy
it's
said it.
security, passion, I think is number one.
Just to add to it, I think it's really interesting having had a mix of growth to developing teams and having to build your own. There's two fundamentals that always stand out, apart from passion, apart from challenge, apart from focus on delivery. And they are what and how. So you measure people on what they do, and often we forget the how they do it. You can have the smartest person in the room, and he'll alienate absolutely everybody because of the way he operates. And the second part of that is having the how conversations and being brave enough to say, what do we do? I don't look for I's, I don't look for me's, I look for we's. And it sounds like a very kind of glib way to say it. But when you have a conversation about what do we do, sometimes getting the hard conversation about you're not fitting in the organization the way we need to have you. And there are occasions when you let people go because they're the wrong people. And you need to get the wrong people off the bus and get the right people on it.
That's right.
And the bus changes direction. So being able to do both of those things at the same time as keeping focus on business and the business goals is crucial.
Yep.
Not easy though.
And I'm gonna just use a Kohler tagline, right? We create gracious experiences. These are really hard conversations, and we have a highly tenured staff. But our aircraft carrier is turning around, right? It's changing course. And some people, as you said, we're gonna take a hit. We have to set expectations. There are certain people that do not fit in our future state organization. And we wanna give them a gracious way to be successful in an organization that they fit better in. So it's as much for their benefit as our own.
And that is all about how you handle it
That's
as well,
correct.
right? That's the key piece of it.
There's one back there, Larry.
Great question, by the way. People questions are hard.
But they're the ones that we tend to shy away from.
Well, right. People first. But we know technology. We got that.
We can do that, but easy. And it's also easier to talk technology than it is to talk people.
Hi, John Cusimano with ACE Solutions. I also really appreciated all of the presentations. One thing that really stood out was that all three of you talked about the importance of taking a risk-based approach, which I thought was very refreshing to hear, because if you dial back even a few years ago, 3-5 years ago, many companies were taking more of a prescriptive approach to securing systems, and maybe that was because there were really not a lot of controls in place anyway, so you had to do something. But it's nice to see that the industry is moving towards recognizing that taking a risk-based approach and using that to prioritize investments makes a lot of sense. So I was particularly happy to hear that, particularly on the OT side. So my question for the panelists was, that's a relatively new discipline, OT cybersecurity risk assessment. So I was curious if you could share some of your experiences in terms of what methodologies did you use, what standards might you have turned to put together these OT or ICS cybersecurity risk assessments?
What about yours? I mean, the cybersecurity framework is a great place to do that, right? The assessment, you get people in a room for half a day and you go over all of the 96 questions. And the difference is, and I think you guys will agree, they're general enough that you can apply them to your business. So it's not prescriptive. It's not, it must be boundary defense or it must be this. And you take those and you assess how important they are to your business, because risk is unique to your business, right? And I think taking those questions, it is a worthwhile exercise. It's a half a day. I mean, you can make it can be much longer depending on how big your team is. But initial take, you'll start to see, oh, I've got bubbles up in the far right red that far outweigh some of the others. And you'll quickly be able to get, even if it's not a 1 through 20 list, it's a grouping of these are our most critical priorities.
And John, I'm going to put on an old hat because when people think about risk management, one of the things they often leave out when we think about it initially, we're thinking about vulnerabilities. What threat? What vulnerabilities do I have in my environment? You're thinking about if those vulnerabilities exploited, what kind of business impact can I have from revenue? What can I take down a process, lose revenue, hurt somebody, liability cases, and things like that. And I think one of the things that is under appreciated in that, and this goes back to prior work in threat intel, is understanding kind of the threat register. If you've got really vulnerable networks that aren't connected, then you're in better shape. If you've got really vulnerable OT environment that's not connected, if it's connected, then your risk profile goes up. If it's connected and there's certainly an active threat landscape or active adversaries coming at you, then that actually raises the risk profile again. That got shaken a little bit with NotPetya and some of the worms and things like that were indiscriminate. There was a lot of a lot of folks that I talked to at plants would say, hey, who's going to attack little old me? And that became the wrong question. The question became, can I be collateral damage in somebody else's war? And that came up. So the definition of that's changed a little bit, but I think, part of that understanding the threat piece of that is underrepresented even in the standards. I also just editorially, I think the reason people use a prescriptive approach for years is because the standards were crappy and they were prescriptive for a long time. And if you go back to early NERC SIP stuff, it was horribly prescriptive, even down to the technologies that you should implement. That's gotten much better, and a lot of those frameworks have come together, and the standards as a result have gotten better, I think, the regulatory standards.
And I think while the concept of risk-based approach in the cyber world, is new or getting more traction now, it's not new in a process safety world, right? So to the fact that you can get them to extend their thought process, that this is just one more vector that we need to look at as part of that process, they get there a lot quicker than having to do something completely different. So that goes back to embedding it in the safety protocol, the safety processes of the organization, and security is just one more element that we're looking at.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the other add is the reminder that the risk framework is not a one and done.
That's right.
It's amazing the number of organizations that, and I was one of them for a long time, that we had to go through the grown monthly annual cycle of we have to do a risk assessment. If you recouch it in terms of maturity assessment, it actually changes the dimension. So one of the things that we were quite effective at was actually pushing it down to the organization to take it as a maturity challenge. And that changes the perspective on risk, because then you're dealing with it from a human perspective, not from it's a standard X or a standard Y, because they are all interchangeable. Just my 10 pence.
Go ahead.
That's
Dawn.
exactly what I was going to say. Darn it. Continuous risk management.
That's right.
It doesn't really matter how you do it. I think it's important to keep doing it. Just this year, things are always changing. We have the China Cybersecurity law. I don't know how many of you are impacted by that, but we had to kick up a risk assessment team across the whole company to look at what are our risks based on the new China cybersecurity law, which continues to change. I can't remember what the name of the company was, but the Bloomberg article about the chips being planted on the circuit boards. We kicked up a risk management team to look into, could that happen to us? Are we sure it hasn't? And what do we need to do to make sure it doesn't happen in the future? So we're constantly kicking in risk management, risk assessment teams, and then tracking their results. And some of them will feed directly into our strategic plan for next year.
And just one other thing is the recognition at the most senior levels of the organization, all the way up to your board of directors, of the recognition that cybersecurity risk in the industrial control platforms needs to be very high. And we were successful in making our way to that. So we have the recognition, we have the support, the understanding, and that's why we get a lot of the focus and support that we need.
Well, thank you. I'm sorry we've run out of time, but I'm sure all of these people would be glad to talk to you if you have more questions when you meet them. So join me with thanking them.